No. Oh, they cause you to cry? No. They have many layers. And so onions have many attributes, and often when you're using a metaphor, you have one in your mind, but you may not be in control of what the readers take from it. And so I'm worried that, like the onion metaphor, the tantrum metaphor, kids that are having a tantrum have a loss of control. And in fact, one interesting connection between the tantrum metaphor and the escape hatch metaphor, the escape hatch is about the illusion of additional control, and the tantrum is about loss of your own control, which can be cathartic. But it could also be about trying to protest in order to get a substantively different outcome. And or it could be just, I need to have my day in a public jurisdiction. I have to have my day in court where I can say that I've been wronged publicly. Those are three different things that might be going on here, and it's not clear to me that which of these are going on. And it's about in my household. As soon as a child threw a tantrum, they immediately lost any chance of getting what they wanted, even if it was an otherwise valid claim, because you could never have a tantrum win. And so to me, this idea of this would be, if this really were a tantrum, the court should never even consider substantively annulling the decision. That would be, I'm also, it raises a question, turning to the personal, of asking your parents whether you had what were your tantrums like, and have you had exposure to tantrums through siblings or family members, okay. So next, let's turn to the escape hatch. As I say, this is about wanting to have increased control. I might play up more about whether it's an illusion or actual control. It's one of the reasons it may be a kind of false consciousness, because the option can have negative value. In another part of this, this was foreshadowing of an astronaut using the phrase "screwed the pooch," and inappropriately, inadvisedly hit the escape hatch, and it caused the craft to sink when it need not have, because he panicked and hit the. And I had a friend of my dad didn't wear seatbelts because he wanted more control to be able to jump out of the car if he was about to be in an accident, and that is a kind of an escape hatch that. And I remember being like 12, and he was saying, no, a seatbelt is an anti-escape hatch thing. In your escape hatch section, you also discuss this Markovitz idea of the annulment as a kind of insurance, as another way of keeping control in an insurance sense. But it's only going to provide people with insurance if they think the judge is sufficiently unbiased, or is likely to reduce a particular the type 1 or type 2 errors that hurts you. There could be appellate judges where you think that does more harm than good being before them. There is, and it raises the possibility to me of asymmetric waivers of annulment. That the parties might say, look, given the possible biases of arbitrators and or appellate judges, we'll let plaintiff have annulment right, but not the defendant. And then turning to this political foundation, your point. I thought it was that this was theoretically a bit vague. One of the things that I think you're doing is you're first trying to explain why there is a arbitrance demand the annulment right, and both the Tantrum and the Hatch theory are about the arbitrance demand for an annulment right of cause of action. But the legal political foundation point is more about why the state would demand it, and it's this. You don't really confront the fact that there are a whole bunch of states that you talk about that have just merely defaults, so they don't demand it enough that they've made it mandatory. And you say that delegated power must have some system of control, and I wonder whether other controls might be possible besides this. Instead of the annulment cause of action, you might be able to impeach, have the equivalent of impeachment of arbitrators so that they never could work again if they were found to have done this. And there are just many other circumstances where in sports leagues, you never are able to have an annulment of a game once it is called. In the vast majority of professional sports leagues, it never happens, even if there was a demonstrably bad refereeing. Even if there was fixed games, they don't change well, at any rate. So I think that to me it's, and I don't understand why you tie it necessarily to democracy, that democracies stop appeals and have final judgments. And the demos decided to delegate it without this. I don't see how that is necessarily inconsistent. And frankly, this part of your argument sounds a little bit like Donald Trump when he says you can't have a country without a wall. You can't have a democracy without an annulment right. I think you can have leaky buckets that still carry some water. And on this political foundation, though, I thought you could do a lot more positively with the fact that the Belgian law and the Swiss law treat wholly foreign arbitrants differently than those that are domestic. And so that seems to me to be consistent with your theory that, why do I care about how these foreigners, I don't have to give them annulment rights, but anybody who's actually touching and concerning my land, I feel like they need to have one. So that's something that you could, I think, affirmatively play up more. And the last biggish point is expositional. I think you have way too many quotations of statutes and scholars. And these are long paragraph quotations of scholars, and I think many of them could be, the statute stuff could be moved to a web appendix, and you could just keep that, you could keep the summary table and describe that a bit more. That would save thing, and I'd paraphrase a lot of the quotations of scholars. I sure cite to them, but paraphrase them, that could be tightened up a lot. And expositionally, so you have too much of those quotations of statutes and scholars, but you have missing exposition about the basics, arbitration basics. You did better in this presentation, said the seat of the arbitration means this. You didn't lay that out, okay? And I know a little bit about arbitration, but not so much about international, and it was really hard for me because I don't know. You talk about country of origin sometimes. You talk about domestic versus international arbitration, seat of arbitration. I don't know what, I'm only kind of like, are these the same things, different distinctions that are being made here? And I wanted to know more, just another sentence or two about the difference between bringing making a challenge in an enforcement proceeding as opposed to a setting aside proceeding. I didn't quite get why an enforcement proceeding isn't sufficient to control. I have a sense that it's related to the fact that enforcement is going to go on in multiple jurisdictions where the annulment proceeding is just in the seat. but you're making me work too hard to figure out that basic implication. So this is an expositional set of things. Don't make it so hard on somebody like me. I'm not sure the short section on investment arbitrations was worthwhile to keep in expositionally, and we're moving towards smaller points. But my last expositional one is the bullet point narratives of the conclusion. I would make more narrative and less Wittgensteinian in the way you frame them. And then just three more small points. I would want to know more about what these states that allow partial waiver, what partial waiver is. Is it inconsistent with democratic control? You might want, in thinking about the kinds of things that could lead to annulment, you might distinguish between what's arbitrary and capricious. Random assignment is arbitrary but not capricious. You do talk about injustice and bribery and collusion, but I didn't manifest disregard, didn't make it in there, and I'm just, since that's a basis in the United States, I was surprised not to see that. And the last point is just a view here of how many rounds of review do you think are sufficient to satisfy the political democratic demands? Because whenever you get to that last judge for which there's no more annulment, if that judge rules against you, well, I paid that judge $1 million and no tantrums, no escape hatches, no political control. That's and there's always going to be a final judge, and so why is putting it down to, why is having one solve all the problems? But the number of appeals, I would have liked more on that. Good job.